On a busy Saturday afternoon at an upscale shopping district, dozens of people stop to watch as an elegantly dressed elderly woman is falsely accused of stealing an expensive bracelet from a luxury boutique. A security guard grabs her arm while several customers mock her appearance, insisting she looks too poor to belong there. Phones come out, no one steps in. Then, a young, kind-hearted woman named Naomi, dressed in her simple work clothes after finishing her shift at a neighborhood library, pushes through the crowd. She calmly tells the guard to let the elderly woman go until the facts are verified. When everyone tells her to mind her own business, Naomi refuses. She points out that accusing someone without evidence is wrong and offers to pay for the bracelet herself if necessary. The boutique manager laughs at Naomi's modest clothes, calling them two poor women trying to fool everyone. Instead of walking away, Naomi demands they check the security cameras. Minutes later, the footage reveals another customer accidentally placed the bracelet into the elderly woman's shopping bag while reaching for her own purchases. Silence. The crowd that had mocked her suddenly looks away in embarrassment. The elderly woman quietly thanks Naomi with tears in her eyes before leaving. Naomi never asks her name. She has no idea that the woman she defended is the mother of one of America's youngest billionaire CEOs. The afternoon had started like any ordinary Saturday for Naomi Williams. She had spent the morning at the public library where she worked, helping children find books for their summer reading program and assisting elderly visitors who struggled with the library's new computer system. Naomi was 28 years old, and although her life was not luxurious, she had learned to find happiness in small things. A hot cup of coffee before work, a good book, a child's smile after discovering a story they loved, and the feeling of knowing that, in some small way, she had made somebody's day easier. Her coworkers often teased her about how easily she gave things away. "Naomi, one day you're going to give away your whole paycheck," her colleague Denise had joked that morning. Naomi had laughed. "I can't give away what I don't have." "Exactly, so stop buying lunch for everybody." "I only bought lunch for Mrs. Parker." "You bought lunch for Mrs. Parker, her granddaughter, and the delivery driver." Naomi smiled. They looked hungry. That was Naomi. She noticed things other people overlooked. After her shift ended that Saturday afternoon, she changed out of her library cardigan, grabbed her handbag, and decided to stop at the upscale shopping district to pick up a birthday gift for her father. Her father, Samuel Williams, was a retired maintenance worker who had raised Naomi alone after her mother's death. He had never asked her for anything. Even when money was tight, he always told her that having a roof over their heads and food on the table was enough. Naomi wanted to buy him something special. She had saved for several weeks to purchase a quality watch. The shopping district was crowded. Luxury cars rolled slowly past the sidewalks. Well-dressed shoppers carried designer bags, and expensive boutiques lined both sides of the street. Naomi felt slightly out of place in her simple blue blouse, black trousers, and comfortable shoes. But she didn't care. She was there for her father. As she approached one of the boutiques, she noticed a crowd gathering near the entrance. At first, she assumed it was a celebrity. Then she heard an elderly woman's trembling voice. "Please, I didn't take anything." Naomi stopped. A security guard was holding the woman's arm. The elderly woman was elegantly dressed, but looked deeply confused and frightened. Her gray hair was carefully styled, and she carried a modest handbag. A boutique manager stood nearby, holding a small jewelry box. "Then explain how the bracelet ended up in your bag," the manager demanded. "I don't know," the woman replied. "I have never seen that bracelet before." Someone in the crowd laughed. Another person whispered loudly. She probably thought nobody would notice. The elderly woman's face fell. Naomi looked around. Nobody was helping. People were recording the situation with their phones. Some were whispering. Others were smiling. Naomi felt something tight inside her chest. She remembered something her father had once told her. If you ever see somebody being treated unfairly, don't wait for somebody else to do the right thing. Naomi stepped forward. Excuse me. The security guard glanced at her. Ma'am, please move along. Naomi looked at the elderly woman. Has she been proven to have stolen anything? The manager turned toward her. This doesn't concern you. It concerns me if someone is being accused without evidence. The manager gave Naomi a dismissive look. Miss, this is a private establishment. I understand that. Then please leave. Naomi didn't move. Instead, she looked at the security guard. Please let her go. The guard hesitated. The manager immediately said, Don't listen to her. Naomi remained calm. If she stole the bracelet, the cameras should show it. If she didn't, you're humiliating an innocent woman in front of all these people. A man in the crowd laughed. Lady, why are you defending her? Naomi turned toward him. Because nobody else is. The laughter stopped. The elderly woman looked at Naomi with surprise. You don't have to do this, she whispered. Naomi smiled gently. Yes, I do. The manager folded his arms. Look at the situation. 2 women standing here pretending they don't know what's going on. Naomi's expression changed. That's an insulting thing to say. The manager pointed toward her clothing. You're dressed like you're coming from a public library, and now you're trying to tell us how to run a luxury boutique. Naomi swallowed her anger. My clothes have nothing to do with whether I'm right. A few people in the crowd nodded. The manager became visibly irritated. Fine, if you're so confident, what do you suggest? Check the security footage. We already know what happened. No, Naomi replied. You know where the bracelet was found. That's not the same thing as knowing who stole it. The elderly woman stared at Naomi. There was something about the young woman's voice. She wasn't shouting. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She simply refused to let fear make her silent. The manager shook his head. You've made your point, now leave. Naomi looked at the elderly woman. Then she looked at the bracelet. If the cameras prove she stole it, I'll leave. The manager scoffed. And if they prove she didn't? Naomi answered immediately. Then you owe her an apology. The crowd became quiet. The manager reluctantly motioned toward the security desk. Pull the footage. The guard walked toward the monitor. Everyone waited. The elderly woman stood completely still. Naomi remained beside her. Then the footage appeared. It showed the elderly woman entering the boutique. She walked slowly toward a display of handbags. Another customer stood beside her. The woman picked up one handbag, placed it back, and reached for another. As she did, she accidentally bumped into the elderly woman's shopping bag. The bracelet fell from the display counter. The second woman quickly picked it up. Then, while adjusting her own shopping bags, she accidentally placed the bracelet inside the elderly woman's open bag. She walked away without noticing. The elderly woman never saw it happen. The security guard froze. The manager's face lost its color. Someone in the crowd whispered, "Oh my God." The elderly woman covered her mouth. Tears filled her eyes. Naomi slowly turned toward the manager. Now you know what happened. Nobody laughed anymore. Nobody recorded the elderly woman with amusement. The same people who had mocked her moments earlier suddenly found the floor very interesting. The manager approached her. Ma'am, I sincerely apologize. The elderly woman didn't respond immediately. She looked at Naomi. Why did you help me? Naomi smiled. Because you needed someone too. The elderly woman's eyes filled with tears. What's your name? Naomi. Naomi what? Naomi laughed softly. Naomi Williams. The elderly woman repeated the name quietly, as if committing it to memory. "Thank you, Naomi." Naomi nodded. "You're welcome." She never asked the woman's name. She never asked where she lived. She never wondered whether the woman had money. She simply picked up her handbag, wished the elderly woman well, and continued shopping for her father's birthday gift. Behind her, the elderly woman watched her disappear into the crowd. Her name was Margaret Carter. And Margaret knew something Naomi didn't. The woman she had just defended had unknowingly changed her life forever. Because Margaret Carter was not a helpless old woman with nowhere to turn. She was the mother of Ethan Carter, one of America's youngest billionaire CEOs. And before that day was over, Margaret would make a decision that would bring Naomi and Ethan together. 3 days after the incident at the boutique, Margaret Carter found herself thinking about Naomi Williams. She had met countless people throughout her life. Business executives, politicians, celebrities, people who smiled at her because they knew her son. People who treated her with extraordinary respect the moment they discovered her identity. But Naomi had been different. Naomi had known nothing about her. She had seen an elderly woman being humiliated and simply decided that someone needed to help. That was why Margaret wanted to see her again. So on Tuesday morning, Margaret drove to the neighborhood public library. She wore a simple cream-colored dress and carried a small handbag. There was no chauffeur following her and no expensive jewelry announcing her status. When she entered the library, Naomi was standing behind the front desk, helping an elderly man use one of the computers. "Click here," Naomi said patiently. The man squinted at the screen. "This thing is determined to make me feel stupid." Naomi laughed. "It isn't smarter than you, Mr. Thompson. It just doesn't explain itself very well." Margaret smiled from across the room. There she was. The same woman. The same kindness. Naomi finally noticed her. Her face immediately brightened. "Ma'am." Margaret walked toward the desk. "I was hoping you would remember me." "Of course I remember you." Naomi lowered her voice. "How are you doing after what happened?" Margaret smiled. "Much better because of you. You don't have to thank me again." "I know, but I want to." Naomi looked at the elderly woman's warm expression and smiled. "Can I help you find something?" "Actually, yes, I'm looking for a book." "What kind?" Margaret thought for a moment. "Something about second chances." Naomi's expression softened. "I think I know exactly what you need." She walked Margaret toward the fiction section. They spent nearly an hour discussing books. Then they talked about family. Margaret learned that Naomi lived with her father, Samuel, and worked at the library because she genuinely loved helping people. Naomi learned only that Margaret had a son who was often away because of work. Nothing about billions. Nothing about Carter Industries. Nothing about private jets or corporate empires. Margaret deliberately kept those details to herself. She wanted to know whether Naomi would continue treating her the same way without knowing who she was. And Naomi did. Over the next few weeks, Margaret began visiting the library regularly. Sometimes she borrowed books. Sometimes she simply sat near the reading area and talked with Naomi during her lunch break. Their friendship grew naturally. Margaret discovered that Naomi volunteered at a community food pantry every Saturday. She also learned that Naomi often used part of her modest salary to buy groceries for elderly people who couldn't afford them. One Saturday afternoon, Margaret secretly followed her to the pantry. She watched Naomi carry boxes, organize food, and speak kindly to everyone. There was no audience, no cameras, no billionaire watching. Naomi was simply being Naomi. Margaret returned home that evening deeply moved. But the friendship took an unexpected turn one rainy evening. Margaret was walking home from a nearby pharmacy when she slipped on the wet sidewalk. Her ankle twisted painfully. She tried to stand but couldn't. A car passed. Then another. Nobody stopped. Until Naomi appeared. She had been leaving the library. "Margaret." Naomi hurried toward her. "Are you hurt?" "I'm afraid I've twisted my ankle." "Don't move." Naomi called for help and stayed beside her until assistance arrived. Then she insisted on accompanying Margaret home. When they finally reached Margaret's residence, Naomi stopped dead. The enormous gates opened. Beyond them stood a magnificent estate. Naomi stared. "Margaret." Margaret smiled nervously. "I suppose I have some explaining to do." Naomi looked around in surprise. "Are you sure this is your house?" Margaret laughed softly. "No, I take care of the family." Naomi accepted the explanation without suspicion. She helped Margaret inside, made sure she was comfortable, and prepared to leave. Before Naomi reached the door, Margaret gently touched her hand. "Thank you." Naomi smiled. "That's what friends are for." Friends. The word stayed with Margaret long after Naomi left. And for the first time in years, Margaret felt that perhaps she had found someone who genuinely cared about her. Not her money, not her family name, but her. What Naomi didn't know was that Margaret's son was about to return home. And when he heard the story of the woman who had defended his mother, he would become determined to meet her. 3 days later, a black luxury sedan pulled through the gates of Margaret's estate. Inside sat her son, Ethan Carter. At 34, Ethan was already one of the most successful young CEOs in the country. He had built Carter Industries from a small technology company into a global business empire. But despite his wealth, Ethan's greatest concern had always been his mother. He had been overseas for nearly 3 weeks handling a major acquisition, and the first thing he did after arriving home was go straight to Margaret's sitting room. "Mom." Margaret smiled as she stood. "Ethan." He hugged her tightly. "I missed you." "I missed you too." But Ethan quickly noticed the slight movement in her walk. "What happened to your ankle?" Margaret waved dismissively. "It's almost healed." "That's not an answer." She sighed. "I slipped." "When?" "A few days ago." "And you didn't tell me." "I knew you were busy." Ethan frowned. "Nothing is more important than you." Margaret smiled. "Actually, something is." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "What?" "A young woman named Naomi Williams." He laughed softly. "Who is Naomi?" Margaret sat down. Then she told him everything. She described the boutique incident, how everyone had stood around watching while she was accused, and how Naomi had stepped forward without knowing anything about her. She told him about the library, the food pantry, the books, and finally, how Naomi had found her injured on the sidewalk and stayed with her until she was safe. Ethan listened quietly. When Margaret finished, he asked, "Does she know who you are?" "No." "Does she know you're my mother?" "No." Ethan smiled. "Then why are you telling me about her?" "Because I want you to meet her." He shook his head. "Mom, you know how complicated my life is." "I do." "People approach me because of money. They pretend to care because they know who I am." Margaret looked directly into his eyes. "That's exactly why you should meet Naomi." Ethan remained silent. Margaret continued. "She defended me when she thought I was just an old woman being mistreated." That sentence stayed with him. The following Monday, Ethan drove to the library. He wore a simple gray jacket and left his expensive watch at home. He didn't want anyone recognizing him. When he entered, he saw Naomi immediately. She was helping a little girl find a book. "Try this one," Naomi said. "I think you'll love it." The girl smiled. "Thank you." Ethan watched quietly. Naomi had no idea who he was. He sat at a nearby table, and pretended to read. For the next 30 minutes, he observed her. An elderly veteran needed help printing a document. Naomi helped him. A mother couldn't find a particular children's book. Naomi searched for it. A homeless man entered asking whether the library had any information about employment programs. Naomi didn't turn him away. She helped him find resources. There was something unusual about her. She treated everyone with the same patience. Eventually, Naomi noticed him. "Can I help you?" Ethan looked up. "Actually, I'm looking for something." "What kind of book?" "Something that makes a person think." Naomi smiled. "That's a dangerous request." He laughed. She walked him toward the shelves. As they talked, Ethan found himself forgetting that he had come there to investigate her character. He simply enjoyed talking to her. Naomi didn't ask what company he worked for. She didn't ask how much money he made. She didn't even seem impressed by his appearance. When he left, Ethan realized something that surprised him. He wanted to come back. And the next week, he did. Then again. And again. Their conversations became longer. They talked about books, family, dreams, and the kind of world they wished to live in. Ethan began telling her small pieces of his life without revealing his wealth. Naomi believed he was simply a successful businessman. One afternoon, Ethan asked, "Why did you defend that woman at the boutique?" Naomi looked confused. "You mean Margaret?" "Yes." She shrugged. "She needed help. But you didn't know her." "I didn't need to." Ethan stared at her. Most people would have walked away. Naomi smiled sadly. "My father taught me that if you see someone being treated unfairly and you have the chance to help, you should." Ethan remembered his mother's words. He finally understood why Margaret admired her. Naomi wasn't kind because someone was watching. She was kind because that was who she was. And somewhere between their conversations, Ethan realized something he hadn't expected. He was falling in love with her. But there was one truth Naomi still didn't know. The man sitting across from her wasn't simply a successful businessman. He was Ethan Carter, the billionaire CEO whose name appeared on business magazines across the country. And when Naomi finally discovered the truth, everything between them would be tested. Over the next several weeks, Naomi and Ethan became closer. What began as casual conversations at the library slowly turned into something neither of them could ignore. Ethan began looking forward to seeing her every day. Naomi noticed the little things about him. He always remembered how she took her coffee. He listened when she spoke about her father. He never interrupted her, and whenever she talked about helping people at the library, he listened as though her work were the most important thing in the world. One evening, Ethan invited her to dinner. Naomi hesitated. "Are you sure?" "Why wouldn't I be? I don't usually go to expensive restaurants." Ethan smiled. "Then we'll go somewhere comfortable." He chose a quiet restaurant where they could talk without being surrounded by crowds. The evening was wonderful. For the first time, Naomi realized she was no longer simply enjoying Ethan's company. She was beginning to fall in love with him. But Ethan's secret remained between them. He wanted to tell her. Several times, he almost did. But each time, fear stopped him. He had seen too many people change after learning his identity. He wanted Naomi to know him first. Then came the invitation that changed everything. Ethan asked Naomi to accompany him to a charity gala. "It's for a literacy foundation," he explained. "I think you'd enjoy it." Naomi agreed because she loved the cause. She borrowed a modest but elegant dress from her friend Denise and arrived at the hotel that evening. The ballroom was filled with executives, celebrities, and wealthy philanthropists. Naomi immediately felt uncomfortable. "Ethan, I don't belong here." He gently took her hand. You belong wherever you choose to be." She smiled. Then the room suddenly changed. People began turning toward the entrance. A group of executives hurried across the ballroom. "Mr. Carter." Naomi froze. The man beside her suddenly became the center of attention. One executive shook Ethan's hand. "Excellent to have you back, sir." Another laughed. "We thought you'd still be overseas." Naomi stared at them. Then she saw the enormous screen behind the stage. A photograph of Ethan appeared. Under it were the words, "Ethan Carter, founder and CEO of Carter Industries." Naomi's heart dropped. She looked at Ethan. "You." He immediately knew. "Naomi, let me explain. You're Ethan Carter." "Yes. The Ethan Carter." He nodded. "The billionaire." Ethan took a step toward her. "Please." Naomi stepped back. "You knew. I wanted to tell you." "When?" "I was going to. But you didn't." Her voice trembled. Ethan lowered his voice. "I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" "That you'd see my money before you saw me." Naomi shook her head. "You don't understand." "Then help me understand." She looked around the ballroom. Everywhere she turned, people were watching them. "All this time, I thought you were just Ethan." "I am." "No, you are the CEO of one of the biggest companies in the country." "But I'm still the same person you've known." "Then why did you hide it?" Ethan struggled to answer. "Because I liked the way you treated me before you knew." Naomi's eyes filled with tears. "And you thought I would change." "I didn't know." She looked away. "That's exactly the problem." Ethan reached for her hand. "Naomi, I never lied about who I was. I just didn't tell you everything." "Maybe not, but you let me believe something that wasn't true." She turned toward the exit. "Naomi." She stopped. "I need time." Then she walked away. Ethan didn't follow her. For the first time since meeting her, he realized money could not fix what had just happened. That night, Naomi returned home heartbroken. She sat beside her father in the living room. Samuel immediately noticed her expression. "What happened?" Naomi tried to smile. "Nothing." Her father knew better. Eventually, she told him everything. Samuel listened quietly. When she finished, he asked, "Do you believe he cared about you?" Naomi wiped her tears. "Yes." "Do you believe he used you?" "No." "Then perhaps you're not angry because he doesn't care." Naomi looked at him. "Then why?" "Because you are afraid that what you thought was real may have been built on something you didn't know." Naomi remained silent. Meanwhile, across the city, Ethan sat alone in his office. He had everything. Money. Power. Success. But none of it mattered. Because the one person he wanted beside him had walked away. And neither of them knew that Margaret was about to intervene. She had watched her son fall genuinely in love for the first time. Now she knew she had to help Naomi understand the truth. But she also knew she could not force her to forgive him. Naomi would have to make that decision herself. The next morning, Naomi arrived at the library earlier than usual. She tried to lose herself in work. She organized returned books, answered questions, and helped visitors find what they needed. But every quiet moment brought Ethan back to her mind. His smile. His kindness. The way he had listened to her. She couldn't simply erase all of that because he was wealthy. Yet the hurt remained. Just before noon, Margaret walked into the library. Naomi looked up and immediately knew why she was there. "Margaret." Margaret approached slowly. "May I sit with you?" Naomi nodded. They moved to a quiet corner of the library. For several moments, neither spoke. Finally, Margaret said, "You are angry with my son." Naomi looked down. I don't know what I am. That's understandable. You knew who I was. Margaret nodded. Yes. And you knew Ethan was coming to see me. Yes. Naomi's eyes filled with hurt. Then why didn't you tell me? Because I wanted you to meet Ethan without knowing his wealth. Naomi looked at her. Margaret continued. I have spent years watching people change when they discover who my son is. Some suddenly become extremely friendly. Others begin asking for favors. Some pretend to love him. She paused. But you defended me before you knew my name. Naomi's expression softened. I didn't do it because I thought you were important. I know. That's why everything hurts so much. Margaret reached across the table and gently held Naomi's hand. Then don't decide anything because of his money. Naomi looked at her. Decide because of the man you knew. Those words stayed with Naomi. Margaret told her about Ethan's childhood. She explained how success had changed his life, but had never completely changed his heart. He doesn't trust easily, Margaret said. When he met you, he was terrified that wealth would destroy something genuine. Naomi whispered, he should have trusted me. Perhaps he should have. Margaret didn't defend his mistake. But fear doesn't always come from a lack of love. Sometimes it comes from having been hurt before. Naomi thought about that. That evening, she went home and looked through the small box where she kept memories. There was the receipt from the restaurant where Ethan had taken her. A bookmark he had given her. A note he'd written recommending a book. None of those things had anything to do with money. She remembered the first time he had helped an elderly man at the library without realizing anyone was watching. She remembered how he had stayed late when she was preparing a literacy event. She remembered how he had listened when she spoke about her father. Maybe she had been so hurt by the secret that she had forgotten everything else. The following afternoon, Naomi drove to Ethan's office. The receptionist recognized her immediately. Mr. Carter is expecting you. Naomi nodded. She entered his office. Ethan stood beside the window. When he saw her, he didn't smile. He simply said, "Thank you for coming." Naomi took a breath. I'm still hurt. I know. I don't like that you hid such a huge part of your life. I know. But I also know that the man I met wasn't pretending to care about me. Ethan looked down. I never was. I believe you. His eyes lifted. Naomi continued. But if we're going to have anything together, there can't be secrets like that between us again. There won't be. She studied him. Do you love me? Ethan didn't hesitate. Yes. His voice was quiet but certain. I loved you before you knew my name, before you knew what I owned, and I loved the fact that you treated my mother like she mattered when you thought she had nothing. Naomi's eyes filled with tears. I loved you before I knew who you were too. Ethan stepped closer. I am sorry. Naomi finally allowed herself to smile. I forgive you. He exhaled deeply, as though he had been holding his breath for days. But, Naomi added, I'm not dadding your bank account. Ethan laughed through his tears. I wouldn't want you to. They embraced. For the first time since the gala, the tension between them disappeared. But neither knew that Margaret had been waiting outside the office. When Naomi walked out, Margaret smiled. She didn't say anything. She simply hugged Naomi. Months later, Ethan and Naomi would turn the painful incident that brought them together into something meaningful. They would create a foundation dedicated to helping elderly people, supporting libraries, and providing educational opportunities for families who struggled financially. But before that happened, they had one more promise to keep. They would return to the place where everything began. The boutique. Not to relive the humiliation, but to prove that one act of kindness could become the beginning of something much greater. Several months passed, and Naomi's life had changed in ways she never could have imagined. She was still the same woman who arrived at the library early each morning, helped children find books, and stayed late whenever someone needed assistance. But now, she and Ethan were building a life together. Their relationship had become stronger because they had learned that love required honesty, trust, and the courage to forgive. Margaret was happier than she had been in years. She had gained more than a friend that afternoon at the boutique. She had gained a daughter. One evening, Ethan and Naomi sat with Margaret in her living room. "I have an idea," Ethan said. Naomi looked at him. "What kind of idea?" "Remember what happened at the boutique?" Margaret nodded. "I've tried to forget it." "I don't want us to forget it," Ethan replied. "I want us to learn from it." He explained that he wanted to establish a foundation in Margaret's name. It would support public libraries, literacy programs, and elderly people who needed assistance. Naomi immediately understood. "You want to turn what happened into something positive." "Exactly." Margaret smiled through tears. "Then call it the Margaret Carter Community Foundation." And they did. The foundation quickly began supporting community libraries and programs that helped elderly people navigate legal, financial, and educational services. Naomi remained involved personally. She refused to simply attach her name to a project and walk away. She visited libraries. She spoke with elderly residents. She helped organize literacy programs. Ethan admired her even more. One afternoon, the luxury boutique where Margaret had been humiliated contacted them. The manager wanted to apologize publicly. The boutique had retrained its staff and introduced new procedures to prevent customers from being falsely accused without evidence. Margaret accepted the apology, but she made one request: never judge someone's worth by their appearance. The manager nodded. "We won't." A year after the incident, Margaret, Naomi, and Ethan returned to the same shopping district. There were no cameras, no reporters, no speeches. They simply walked together. As they passed the boutique, Naomi suddenly noticed an elderly man struggling with several shopping bags. One bag slipped from his hand. Without hesitation, Naomi stepped forward. "Sir, let me help you." The man smiled gratefully. "Thank you." Ethan watched her with a familiar smile. Margaret looked at her son. "She hasn't changed." Ethan shook his head. "That's why I love her." Naomi returned a moment later. She had no idea that Margaret and Ethan had been watching. She simply continued walking. Margaret gently took Ethan's hand. "The day they tried to humiliate me," she whispered, "they unknowingly introduced me to the daughter I always prayed for." Ethan's eyes became wet. He looked at Naomi. She was walking a few steps ahead, completely unaware of the conversation. Ethan hurried forward and took her hand. Naomi smiled. "What?" "Nothing." "Why are you looking at me like that?" "Because I'm grateful." "For what?" "For the day you decided to defend a stranger." Naomi squeezed his hand. "I'd do it again." "I know." They continued walking. The sun was beginning to set over the city. For Naomi, wealth had never been the measure of a person's value. For Ethan, success had never felt so meaningful. And for Margaret, the woman she once met while being publicly humiliated had become the daughter she never knew she needed. But the story didn't end with the billionaire CEO falling in love with the kind woman. It ended with something much more powerful. Naomi's kindness had not been rewarded because she defended a billionaire's mother. She had been rewarded because she had done the right thing when there was absolutely nothing in it for her. She hadn't known Margaret's name. She hadn't known her family. She hadn't known her wealth. She simply saw a frightened, elderly woman who needed someone to stand beside her. And she stood. That one decision changed 3 lives. It changed Margaret's life because she found a daughter. It changed Ethan's life because he found a woman who loved him for who he was rather than what he owned. And it changed Naomi's life because one ordinary act of courage opened the door to a future she could never have imagined. As they walked away from the boutique, Margaret looked back one final time. The place where she had once been humiliated was now the place where she had witnessed the beginning of something beautiful. She smiled. Sometimes, the greatest moments in life begin when we choose to do something kind without expecting anything in return. Because you never know who is watching. You never know whose life you may change. And you never know whether the stranger you help today might become the person who changes your life tomorrow. Naomi had defended an old woman because it was the right thing to do. She never knew that behind that elderly woman's quiet smile was a billionaire's mother. And she certainly never imagined that the son of the woman she defended would one day hold her hand and tell her, "You loved me before you knew I had anything to give you." Naomi smiled. "I didn't fall in love with what you had." She looked into his eyes. "I fell in love with who you were." And Ethan knew, in that moment, that no amount of money could ever buy what Naomi had given him. Not loyalty. Not kindness. Not forgiveness. Not love. Those things had to be earned. And he knew he would spend the rest of his life earning them. The woman who once stood alone in a crowd to defend a stranger had finally discovered that kindness had a way of finding its way home. And sometimes, the smallest act of courage can lead to the greatest love story of all. If this story touched your heart, don't leave just yet. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and come back for our next story. And tell us in the comments, if you were Naomi, would you have stepped forward to defend Margaret even if you knew nothing about her? Sometimes, kindness costs nothing, but it can change everything. Until the next story, remember, treat people with kindness because you never know whose life you might be changing.